Fix the money, fix the world. That's what a lot of people in the Bitcoin crowd say. That's what a lot of people in the gold crowd say. And they have a point to a certain extent. But really, what they are saying is fix the incentives. Because if you fix the money, if you destroy fiat and the power of fiat in government, then you will fix the incentives. Fiat money and the power to print with government has all kinds of moral hazards. It would be like, hey, we're trying to test people's knowledge in medical school, but it's a take home test. But you're not supposed to look at the book. You have the book right next to you, but the rules are you're not supposed to look at the book. Who in their right mind wouldn't look at the book? Because that's a moral hazard, right? You want to test somebody's knowledge, but they're able to cheat so easily and really not be noticed. And fiat and the power to print with government, because you got to think politicians want to stay in power. What is a great way to stay in power? Promise. Promise handouts. And they're able to promise handouts because they don't have to take immediately from another taxpayer because they're able to run deficits. They're able to fund war, etc. So I want to take a look at this really great article here from Zero Hedge and run through some of the moral hazards of fiat. It says here at the top, fixing the incentives, how fiat funds national corruption. A lot of you are so confused as to, including myself, a couple years ago, how did the government get so big? How did it become so monstrous? How is it affecting our lives to such a degree? Because I remember when I was a kid, people would say, who the president is doesn't affect your life. People focus on politics way too much. And now it's like, depending on which way the wind blows with the president, they're going to come out with an executive order, and it's actually going to affect your day-to-day life, your job, inflation, yada, yada. And all of that has to do, in my opinion, with the incentives of fiat. So let's take a look here. With great power comes great responsibility. The central control of money is an enormous prize, like the Infinity Gauntlet of Marvel fame, giving those in power the ability to steal the wealth of their nations at will. How do they do this? Through inflation, printing away prosperity, printing away productivity. I always like to attach dollars to productivity. So if you think about it in that sense, they are printing away your labor. So when you go to work and you exchange your time for money, that money has a certain value. And when they print it, they're printing away that value of your labor. A lot of people don't think about it that way because it happens slowly and then all at once. It says here in the article, the main beneficiary of the main beneficiary of this obscured ability to print is the government that can run deficits on its budget. This was not the de facto practice historically, as taking on debt under sound money is very expensive. Why is it very expensive? Because you actually have to take out a loan and you don't set the interest rate. You're taking on a loan from somebody else, they set the interest rate. Free market interest rates usually hover around 5.6 or higher, depending on the economic circumstances and credit worthiness. What's 5.6 percent of 31 trillion? Let's see. I think it's like 1.5, maybe 2 trillion. It's a lot. And that's what we'd have to pay in interest a year. So do you think we'd have 31 trillion in debt? I don't think so. Taking on debt under sound money generally means having to tighten your budget or raising taxes later, which no voter likes. So we are in this happy median where we just spend to oblivion. We don't raise taxes. We go to war for 20 years and people don't, are we over there? Where are we at? We're in all these countries. And fine, you can think that that's good or bad. It doesn't really matter. But what I've always said is how much money you spend is a math question. Where you spend it is potentially a moral or political question, but how much money you spend is a math question. But with fiat, you're able to kind of move the chess pieces around and, hey, look over here. And then inflation comes because the money's not coming directly out of my pocket with taxes. It's coming out of my pocket through inflation. So it's hard to point the finger at exactly, okay, you took money here and you spent it here. So further reading, running a deficit means hard choices. don't have to be made. We don't have to cut Social Security. We don't have to cut Medicare. We don't have to cut defense spending. We don't have to cut anything. We don't have to cut entitlements. Everyone's going to have we could all stay home. We could shut down the economy. But that's a false binary, in my opinion. So it temporarily means you don't have to make hard choices, but then it makes the choices harder later. Because at this point, right, we have 31 trillion in debt. If we were to print more, what would that do? It would cause more inflation. It would cost, the debt burden would cost even more. So now we don't, the printing of fiat has limited our choices. We can't take on more debt. Otherwise, it's going to cause more inflation. By the way, that's what's going to happen. Instead of having to choose between high interest rate debt, increasing taxes, or budget cuts, fiat money lets government avoid all three with an additional option, implicit taxation through inflation in the form of low interest, easily renewed debt. So if you take on 31 trillion in debt, and this is how they were able to do this for so long. The interest rates kept going lower and lower and lower. And just like refinancing on your house, if you're able to get lower and lower interest rates, your payment gets lower and lower. So you can cash out refi, maybe your payment stays the same. Same thing happens with the government. The problem is they're the ones setting the interest rate to a certain degree with the Fed. And this is why you see, when Jerome Powell speaks, the market makes massive moves up or down based off of his tone, because it's not a free market. It's only based on how much free money is going to be injected into the system. Further reading, the ability to run a deficit not only throws all discipline out the window, but it lets people in charge use the money for things that people in charge tend to care about, i.e. staying in power. Hence, policies that favor certain constituencies or even straight up bribes proliferate. So you're sitting there wondering, how in the world are they able to do this? Why are people voting for them? They're promising them other people's money. They're promising them grandchildren's money. And these politicians typically don't care about the future. They care about today and getting reelected. And unfortunately, a lot of citizens, I would say, are uneducated economically speaking. So they vote for things like shutdowns, government printing, until they feel the effects. And that's what's so unique about now is if you talk to your average citizen, who doesn't think about politics, doesn't think about economics, guarantee you they think about the price of eggs, price of their groceries, the price of gas, can they afford a home, and all those things are going up and becoming impossible. So the government's been able to promise and promise and promise because of lower interest rates, and now we're at the end of that road. So it'll be interesting to see how these politicians play this, because they can't press the easy fiat button again. They cannot press the, okay, I want to get reelected. Let's hand out more stuff. They can do it, but it'll cause immediate consequences, which is more inflation. Immediate. All right, let's keep reading. What fiat does to this desire is to give those in power many more options. Under sound money, but okay, I already said that. Governments can provide benefits to various constituents to get their support. This can include everything from healthcare to food to pensions. Indeed, and I've said this before, like governments bailed out state pensions, unions, free market unions. Biden did that recently. Indeed, since the advent of fiat money, these entitlements have become common all over the world. They are generally sold to the public as a form of compassion, and they're very popular due to their perception that they're free. Ain't no free lunch. The hidden taxation of inflation is rarely even acknowledged and let alone blamed. Social Security, for example, started as a tiny program relatively in the U.S. budget, is currently 21% of the budget, and has grown enormously as more and more generous benefits have been granted. Similar programs like Medicare continue to grow. Food stamps covering 3 million people in 1969 covers 15 million people by 1974, and some 42 million people today. How can you say your economy is strong when 42 million of your citizens have to get assistance from the government? Does that make sense? No. We're well past the point where self-interested voting will guarantee escalation of money printing, meaning it, beatings will continue until morale improves. What else does fiat allow government to do? Another usage of fiat money for political power is the enhancement of the police state. Staying in power requires a lot of vigilance and watching for those would-be revolutionaries in part of every government agenda. Fiat money has several mechanisms to do this. First, as fiat money is increasingly digital, governments can restrict its movements for those that are in opposition. Where have you heard this before? Taking away bank accounts in a relatively cheap way for governments to defund their opposition, weaponizing the IRS, taxing certain people more, yada, yada, yada. Many human rights activists around the world have felt the choking hand of government restrictions over their money. Second, fiat money can fund direct surveillance. Do you feel like you're in a free country right now? The government, when it comes to the Patriot Act, um, these behemoth three-letter agencies that are focusing more on internal threats than external, redefining what a terrorist is. If they don't have the money, they can't do this. And let's just say we all stop paying taxes, because at the end of the day, it's our taxes that are funding this in your labor that keeps this ball rolling. But they're able to balloon these budgets not just through taxes, but also through printing and therefore through inflating the money and therefore devaluing your labor. It's sick, it's insidious. And for the first time in my lifetime, people are actually talking about it because they actually feel inflation. Do you actually think it's 9%? It topped out at 9%. It's actually like 16 to 20. So go to, you want to know how much inflation is, go to a Walmart, go to a Target, and just open mic out there. Go, hey, good news, everyone. Inflation dropped to 5%. And they're going to look at you sideways. They're like, what the heck are you talking about? It is not 5%. Inflation's relative, right? We're going to keep out food, shelter, and energy in the inflation measurement. What else does it fund? Endless war. Endless war. Thus far, we have discussed the various ways in which government can use fiat money to defend internal threats against the rule. The other major threat is staying in power is external threats, which takes on the form of government wanting to topple your country. Defending against external threats means building up the military, especially through highly destructive weapons like nuclear warheads. Thus, many countries use fiat money to build up their militaries. I like to ask people, what was the objective in Afghanistan? And then if you can answer that, then follow that up with why were we there for 20 years? If the objective was to kill terrorists, how does the most powerful military in the world not defeat, like, essentially the lowest tech military, the Taliban, in the world in a matter of days? So what's with the 20 years? Oh, okay, so then you ask yourself, it was nation building. That was our goal, to get Afghanistan on their feet. Okay, then why did we leave? You know what I mean? It doesn't make any sense. And in the long run, proof is in the pudding. What actually happened? We waste a whole bunch of money over there. That's what happened. Sorry. Frustrating. What else happens with fiat? And you guys see this throughout the economy. And I'm saying to people, a lot of people don't know. They're like, well, what we need to do is get a Republican in office, and they'll get this fixed right away. No. Look at the amount of debt that's been added, bipartisan, in the last 20 years. Republican and Democrat. It's really a bipartisan thing. It's this siren song they can't avoid. It's this, hey, I can get voters by printing money, and Just like I was talking about, I can cheat on my test. The book's right there. Who's not going to do that? Yeah. Rent seeking jobs. The final use of fiat for staying in power is bribery. That would never happen here, right? We usually think of bribery going the other way, where people in the industry bribe officials in government for special favors. And indeed, that still happens. But what governments do in many ways are worse. The use of fiat to buy votes, in a sense, entitlements that are a form of that, more effectively is bringing more people into the government itself. Government grows to this behemoth, and now it's 20 to 25% of GDP. Government employees are impossible to fire. So we've all seen this. And a lot of people say to themselves, you know what the problem is we don't have a good president. And I don't think that's the problem. I think the incentives are the problem. And fiat provides moral hazard that is unavoidable to politicians, because if you don't take that moral hazard, your opponent will, and they'll win. And we are reaching, we're feeling those consequences of the day of reckoning, of pretending for 2 decades now that there is no consequence to spending, that everyone can live and get money, and half of the people can be unproductive, and the government can fight foreign wars for 20 years with no objective, and all this stuff can happen, and there will be no inflation, and there'll be no consequences. We're getting closer to that day of reckoning, in my opinion, and fiat is the incentive that needs to be fixed. I'd love to hear how you guys think that incentive will be fixed. Like I said, I'm a big fan of Bitcoin because at least it keeps the government in check. So does gold. But that's a whole nother topic of how government controls the price of gold. But if there is an option B, if there's always something, let's just say countries and individual voters can go, hey, you know what? I don't like the way you are spending the currency that I spend my time earning. So sure, I'll spend and transact in your currency, but I'm going to save in something else. That takes away a lot of power from government. But they realize that. That's why they control the price of gold. Anyways, let me know what you guys think the future holds as far as fiat. We are on the road to a day of reckoning. And that's a good thing to a certain extent, because anything that cannot be sustained, which is the path we're on, won't be sustained. And to keep pretending that we live in a fantasy world and we all can own pet unicorns and everyone will be happy, is irresponsible. And it's going to cause more pain, my humble opinion. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video. See you guys in the next one. Peace.